Hey everybody, Mr. Wright here. So today we're going to be wrapping up chapters 6 and 7 today. So a lot to cover and not a lot of time, but let's get to it. So we're going to focus on the railroads. We're going to talk a little bit about mining, a little bit more about a lot of the development going on in the territory and the new state, and it's going to be exciting. So here we go. All right. So first and foremost, as the Civil War ended, the United States, is looking to try and unite the country a little bit better than had been done previously. And the one of the ways to do this was, of course, through the railroad. So Utah's chosen as this new railroad of the crossroads of the West. And two of the different companies that come to Utah, there's the Union Pacific Railroad, which actually kind of neat thing. I have a Union Pacific stock certificate, if you want to look at that right there, um, that I got a few years ago. It's kind of a neat thing. And then also the Central Pacific. So Union Pacific was coming from the east, and they hired a lot of Irish workers. And then you had Central Pacific coming from the west, from California, with a lot of Chinese immigrants. And they're hiring lots and lots of immigrants. There sadly was some racism involved. The Irish people made less than the rest of regular Anglo settlers, but the Chinese made a third of what the Irish were making. So there was definitely some racism and bias going on there. Uh, this video right here does a really good job of talking about the impact of the railroad and especially the Chinese and what they did. So if you want to go ahead and click on that, I'll have the link in the description. You should go and check that out. Also, this other link right here, after you've watched that, is a really good one. It focuses on a show called Hell on Wheels that is looking into the perspective of the Chinese, kind of like from a dramatic interpretation of it. And it's really interesting, and I think a really it'll get you engaged. And if you like history, I think you'll like it. So if you want to check that out too, you may. That's like a little trailer for that. And then let's watch this little graphic here in the corner that shows us kind of the expansion of the railroads throughout the United States during this period. The next link that you'll be able to click as well, and I'll share both links with you, is that doesn't have the red but has white. That one is really useful because it will also show not only this growth that's happening, and you can see here, like with the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, a lot of growth is going to happen after that. The 1870s, 1880s, a lot of railroads connecting the West. So the Western United States really gets interconnected with the United States, whereas it hadn't really been done before. And this will lead right up to 1921 when the railroad does really like reaches its zenith, its peak. After that, if you watch the other video, you'll kind of see what ends up replacing that. But go ahead and watch that video and you can see that for yourself. Okay. And then we show the video in class. So, and as the other video showed, if you watched it with the other graphic, that later the automobile in the 1920s will end up kind of superseding railroads, and automobiles and cars and roads are going to become the new medium of getting around the country. Now, if you look here at this picture, they discussed this in one of the videos too, if you watched it. But one of think about, notice anyone who helped build the railroad that's not there? If you said the Chinese, you'd be correct. Now, obviously, there weren't any women here in the picture either, but they weren't really doing a lot of the labor. But the Chinese had done a lot of labor, and they were excluded. So they did something kind of neat. If you watch this video right here, a few years ago, to kind of make up for this injustice, they invited all the different people that were the descendants of these folks, of the Chinese who helped build the railroad, and they came and redid the photo. And while it doesn't make up for the past, it was kind of a neat gesture, and I thought that was really cool. I'm glad they did it. All right, so continuing on. So in the meantime, for your notes, Utah's not just sitting by on their laurels. They actually, Brigham Young reaches out, gets a $2 million contract, which at the time is a lot of money, with Union Pacific, and gets them to agree to help. The Mormons can help and make a lot of money doing it. They were going to build the railroad right through Salt Lake, but the president kind of overrides that. Again, it's just another example of the anti-Mormonism feeling that's kind of prominent throughout the country. If you want to learn more about Golden Spike and some of the cool stuff to see there, today you can check out this link here. But the railroad's going to bring a lot of changes, right? As it makes its way, from Omaha and Sacramento and San Francisco, it's going to make mining a lot easier. So mining's going to really take off both west and in Utah. Utah is going to be able to also like sell a lot of agricultural goods. It had been independent and self-sufficient for a while now, so now they could sell that to other people. In fact, as an example, they sell 60,000 pounds of dried peaches. Like that's a lot of peaches, so that's pretty cool. The rail is also going to bring a lot more Mormons to Utah, but it's also going to bring a lot of other people too, right? And if you look at page, it's 175. Um, Talks about some of the differences and changes. Yeah, so like on page 175, in 1847, took them 100 days to get from Omaha, that area, the Pacific Northwest to Utah. Um, some groups did it as soon as 80 days, but you're looking at, at least 3 months. And then the stagecoach cuts that down to only a couple of weeks, and then the train is just a few days of travel to Salt Lake. So the railroad is going to change things. It's going to change things quite a bit. Now, how else does it connect to Utah? Well, as you can see here, the railroads will expand and fill out and connect Utah and the surrounding area. Um, so these railroads spring up pretty quickly and help make that happen. And again, Utah's never going to be the same again. For instance, one of the craziest parts of Utah is Corinne. Today, Corinne looks like a sleepy little Mormon community, but back then it was the Wild West. It was a railroad town and it was crazy. Lots of saloons and lots of gambling halls and all sorts of crazy stuff going on there. And Ogden as well started out as a railroad town. So eventually that will change when the railroad ends up moving and becomes less prominent. But for a long time, Corinne was kind of the Wild West of Utah. So if you want to learn more about that, you can read about it on page 175. Talks a little bit more about Corinne and Ogden. Um, Now, if we kind of jump and go to page 193, until the 1870s, Eastern Utah is home to the Native Americans. And in 1877, as the Walker War and these other conflicts end with the federal government, the United States wants to populate these lands with other people. And they call the area the Bench near Vernal. And, some people might describe it as a large, barren cactus flat with desert lizards, scorpions, and snakes, which isn't super appealing. But they ended up renaming it actually Vernal, which means like spring-like. But I wanted you to take a minute and think about, okay, well, if you're going to be talking about Vernal or somewhere out in Utah where it's known for really beautiful night skies, the sunsets, because you've got the Uinta Mountains to the north, but not to the east or west. There's not really any big mountains. So really nice sunsets, beautiful nights scenery, beautiful country. It's wide open spaces, like the song "Wide Open Spaces." So if you wanted to take a minute, we did this in class and paused and talked about it, and came up with some good ideas. So if you want to do that for a sec, go ahead. Some of the ideas we came up with were like Star Hollow and Sundrop Valley. There was a lot of really interesting and appealing sounding names that made it sound good. Vernal is not bad either, but depending on how you look at it, the Bench is not really appealing name. So hence the name change. Meanwhile, Mormons are continuing to settle other parts of the state. San Juan Mission is one of the big ones. That's down in the southeastern part of the state. It's known as Hole in the Rock. If you want to look at and learn a little bit more about that, check out the video here. But we're talking Monticello, Blanding, and those areas down there. And Lake Powell is down there as well now. Yosapa was a town founded by a bunch of Hawaiians coming to Utah. Pretty neat, so worth checking out. Um, and you can watch that video there if you'd like. Unfortunately, EUSEPA failed, but it's still an interesting story. Now, meanwhile, religions in the territory. Lots of different religions coming to Utah. Catholics, Protestants. One of the big ones, his name's Duncan McMillan. He arrived in 1875 with the Presbyterian Church. He helps found a couple of different schools and churches all across the state. He's working with, Dr. McNeese and Reverend Martin and Manti. There's a really cool, the American Legion in Manti used to be one of their churches, so worth taking a look at that on Google Maps if you want. I'll have a link for it. Baptists came to Utah in the 1880s. You got Lutherans, Methodists coming here. One of the most, shall we say, antagonistic ones was Thomas Iliffe. He just didn't get along with people and liked to argue. And so we discussed as a class, like, is that really a great idea, or is there a better way? So if you want to pause the video and kind of consider that, go ahead. Most of us in the class agreed that it's better to be a little more tolerant, and it's okay to talk about things, but like fighting and arguing about things, just yelling past each other is not really productive or helpful. Turning to page 202, lots of different schools in the territory. This is a quote from the very first school. It was a lot like what you might call like Sunday school. And initially, that's one of the complaints about the first schools that are run by the Latter-day Saints is that they are more religious in nature than maybe they need to be. I mean, they're literally holding school inside the chapels like that they built. And I mean, why wouldn't you? They're there and they're not being used that much during the week. But if you weren't LDS, then that's, problematic, right? And this is before we had public education that was widespread, but still, like people who weren't LDS didn't love that. Now, the Wasatch Academy, of course, is one of the more famous ones created by, Reverend McMillan. And even today, they have a really great basketball program, good private school down in Mount Pleasant. Continuing on, other examples of higher education, you've got the University of Deseret, which becomes University of Utah. Um, all of these that have like the little asterisk next to them started out as like something a little bit smaller than say university, like more like a high school. But that period it was kind of interesting because a lot of the high schools and colleges were kind of a similar idea. So there wasn't a clear distinction between the two. Brigham Young University, it starts out as an academy, is founded in 1875. That's the building that it started out in, which today, if you know, is the Provo what? Library, good job. Westminster College, 1875, is also built up in Salt Lake. You have Utah State University, which you might recognize that. That's one of their more famous buildings, 1888. Dixie State then becomes Utah Tech University just recently. It's founded in 1888. Started out as Dixie State College or Dixie College. Snow College, founded in 1888. Also as a high school. Weber State University starts out a little more humble in 1889. And then SUU or Southern Utah University happens in 1897. Yay. All right, continuing on. So some different innovations and things happening during this time. Well, electricity comes to Utah. Huzzah. Happens in 1880. It's a kind of a crank thing. And if you know how generators work, essentially what they do is, and there's a generator right here. And I thought this was pretty impressive. A quarter horsepower? Whoa, that's like nothing today. But back then that was, when it's a new thing, it was a lot. And they would take a magnet wrapped in wire. You'd have to manually move the magnet or the wire around the magnet, and that creates a flow of electricity, right? With the electrons flowing in the wire because of the magnetic field. And they would do this either with water moving a water wheel. That was one of the more common ways, and that's how most of our first electricity came to Utah. Wasn't super reliable, but yeah. And then later, as this became more reliable, it brought new innovations like trolleys and other things. So there's an example of a trolley, and you can watch the video to learn a little bit more about trolleys. Continuing on, amusement parks become a big thing as a result of this electricity. Saltaire is one of the big ones. There's an interesting video you can learn about Saltaire there. Lagoon also is built, although it's built after the original Lake Park Resort that gets replaced. And Lagoon is still a really big thing today. So it started officially in 1896, but it was a rebrand of the original Lake Park Resort right there. You can check out that video there, watch some of the cool things they do there. The telephone gets invented during this period, and a lot of different things are coming to Utah. So you can see here, we've got all sorts of new things. We've got telephones, light bulbs, they're first showing up in the 1870s and 80s and making their way west towards Utah. In fact, if you want to check out this link here, you can see an example of a phone number in Springville that was used for a laundry for a really long time. And that number was just 15. Call 15 before phone numbers became really prominent. So back then, most people didn't really have phones. Mining continues near Eureka. There's this amazing photo that someone took. A lot of mining going on. Though that ore weighs a lot, so they've got to move that, and they use that with trains. So Eureka, Silver City, other places down near there become very famous and popular as a result of this. You can literally see if you look how many trains do you see in this picture? Okay, hopefully you see there's actually four. There's one up here at the very top, one behind, like one below it, and there's the one going over the big bridge, and there's one going through the bridge, and they made a tunnel through the bridge. So pretty crazy. This is when Carbon County gets settled because of all the coal, and so here's Helper, Utah, and lots of coal getting produced, and then other towns in the area in Emery and Carbon County get settled as well. So a lot of the people moving there are Latter-day Saints. There are others as well, but Utah continues to grow. And in fact, my great grandfather Oliver Huntington. He's the namesake for Huntington. That's kind of cool. So there's our relationship. Continuing on, Indian farms and reservations. Native Americans continue to get exploited, sadly. So you can read a little bit more about that if you want on page 204. The Buffalo Soldiers, Butch Cassidy. This is kind of an interesting little tidbit of Utah history. These are African American soldiers that come here and they get nicknamed Buffalo Soldiers by the natives because their hair reminds them of buffalo fur, which is kind of interesting. And then, of course, Butch Cassidy, interesting story about him. So we'll continue with this next section after because unfortunately we run out of time. But anyway, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. And we'll finish. That was pretty much the rest of chapter 6, and we'll finish chapter 7 next time. Thank you. See you guys later. Bye.